The dust never settled in Copper Ridge, Montana. It hung in the air like broken promises, coating everything with the grit of hard living and harder dreams. But on this particular morning in 1884, as the eastbound train wheezed to a stop at the weathered platform, something was about to change forever. Her name was Charlotte May Wilson, and at 22 years old, she stood barely 5 feet tall in her worn leather boots. She clutched a carpet bag containing everything she owned and a letter that had promised her a new life. What she found instead was rejection so cruel it would have broken a lesser woman. But sometimes when the world turns its back on you, fate sends a giant to catch you when you fall. And sometimes that giant has hands strong enough to build you a home and a heart gentle enough to make it worth living in. This is the story of a woman deemed too small for the frontier, and the man who proved that the biggest love comes in the most unexpected packages. Before we dive in, let me know where you're tuning in from in the comments below. This story is about to take you on a journey you won't soon forget. The Montana sun beat down mercilessly on the Copper Ridge train platform, casting long shadows that seemed to point toward nowhere. Charlotte May Wilson adjusted her blue calico dress for the 100th time, her heart hammering against her ribs like a caged bird desperate for freedom. 3 months ago, she'd been Charlotte Wilson of Boston, Massachusetts, a seamstress in her aunt's dress shop, invisible among the bolts of silk and endless conversations about other people's weddings. At 22, she was already considered a spinster by Boston standards. Too quiet, too small, too forgettable. When consumption took her aunt, Charlotte found herself alone with nothing but debts and the frightening realization that she had nowhere to go. The matrimonial advertisement in the Boston Herald had seemed like divine intervention. Rancher in Montana Territory seeks wife, must be of good character and strong constitution. Comfortable life guaranteed for the right woman. Walter Higgins had seemed decent enough in his letters. He'd described his cattle ranch, his need for a companion, and his desire for a proper family. What he hadn't mentioned was his very specific ideas about what constituted a proper woman. Now, standing on the platform with her carpet bag at her feet, Charlotte watched a tall, thin man approach with an expression that made her stomach sink. His pale eyes swept over her small frame with the same assessment a rancher might give a disappointing calf. "Miss Wilson?" His voice carried the flat disappointment of a man whose expectations had been thoroughly dashed. "Mr. Higgins." Charlotte lifted her chin, trying to project confidence she didn't feel. "It's a pleasure to finally meet you." Walter Higgins circled her slowly, his boots clicking against the wooden planks. "You're smaller than I expected." The letters never mentioned height requirements, sir." "Letters," he spat into the dust. "Letters don't mention a lot of things. They don't mention that a man needs a wife who can pull her weight, not one he'll have to worry about getting blown away in the first strong wind." Heat flooded Charlotte's cheeks. Around them, other passengers were departing, families reuniting, businessmen striding off with purpose. She was acutely aware of the spectacle they were creating. "Mr. Higgins, I assure you I'm quite capable of—" "Look at you!" His voice rose, drawing curious stares. "You can't weigh more than 100 pounds soaking wet. What use would you be on a ranch? Can't birth strong sons, can't handle cattle, probably faint at the sight of blood." Each word hit Charlotte like a physical blow. She'd survived poverty, loss, and the grinding uncertainty of her aunt's illness. She'd kept the dress shop running when her aunt was too weak to work. She'd made the impossible decision to travel across the country to marry a stranger. But this public humiliation was threatening to break something inside her that she wasn't sure could be repaired. "I may be small," she said quietly, "but I'm stronger than I look." Walter laughed, a harsh sound that attracted more attention. "Honey, this isn't Boston society. This is the frontier. I need a wife who can work alongside me, not a delicate flower I'll have to coddle." "Then what do you suggest I do?" The question came out sharper than Charlotte intended, desperation making her bold. "Train back east leaves tomorrow morning. I'll pay for your ticket." Walter reached into his vest pocket and pulled out some crumpled bills. "Consider it charity." The money felt like an insult wrapped in practicality. Charlotte looked at the bills, then at the man who'd just reduced her worth to her physical size, then at the vast Montana landscape stretching endlessly beyond the station. "Keep your charity," she said, pushing the money back toward him. "I'll make my own way." Walter shrugged with the indifference of a man who'd already moved on to other concerns. "Suit yourself, but don't come crying to me when you realize what a mistake you've made." He walked away without a backward glance, leaving Charlotte standing alone on the platform as the train that had brought her pulled away with a mournful whistle. Suddenly, the vastness of Montana territory felt personal and crushing. That's when she first saw him. He stood at the far end of the platform, tall enough to make the other men look like children. Even from a distance, Charlotte could see the breadth of his shoulders, the way his presence seemed to command space without demanding attention. His dark hair caught the afternoon light, and when he removed his hat to wipe his brow, she caught a glimpse of a face that was both rugged and surprisingly gentle. But it was his eyes that stopped her cold. Even across the bustling platform, she could feel them on her, not with the dismissive assessment Walter had given her, but with something that looked almost like concern. The giant of a man started walking toward her, his boots making soft sounds against the wood. With each step, Charlotte became more aware of just how imposing he was. He had to be at least 6.5 feet tall, with arms that looked like they could snap a man in half or cradle a child with equal ease. "Ma'am," he said when he reached her, his voice a low rumble that seemed to come from somewhere deep in his chest. "I couldn't help but notice you might be in some difficulty." Up close, he was even more impressive. His dark hair was shot through with silver at the temples, suggesting he was older than her, maybe 35 or so. His face was weathered by sun and wind, but his brown eyes held a kindness that made Charlotte's defenses waver. "I'm quite all right, thank you," she lied, clutching her carpet bag tighter. The giant's eyes flicked to the retreating figure of Walter Higgins, then back to her face. "Forgive me for saying so, ma'am, but you don't look all right. You look like someone who just had their world turned upside down." Charlotte felt her carefully constructed composure begin to crack. "It's nothing I can't handle." "I'm sure it's not," he said gently, "but that doesn't mean you should have to handle it alone. Name's Benjamin Cross. Most folks call me Ben." Charlotte Wilson. The name felt strange on her tongue now, uncertain in a way it hadn't been an hour ago. "Miss Wilson, I don't mean to pry, but do you have somewhere to stay tonight?" The question hit Charlotte like a bucket of cold water. In all her careful planning, she'd never considered what would happen if Walter rejected her. She'd assumed that once she arrived, her future would be settled one way or another. The possibility of being stranded hadn't occurred to her optimistic 22-year-old mind. The hotel, I suppose." She had enough money for perhaps 2 nights at a modest establishment. But then what? Ben studied her face with those perceptive brown eyes. "The Copper Ridge Hotel's decent enough, but it can get rough after dark. Lots of cowboys and miners passing through. Might not be the safest place for a lady on her own." "Then what would you suggest, Mr. Cross?" Ben was quiet for a long moment, clearly wrestling with something. When he spoke again, his voice was careful, respectful. "I've got a cabin about 5 miles north of town. Nothing fancy, but it's clean and safe. There's an extra room you could use until you figure out your next move." Charlotte stared at him. "You're inviting a complete stranger to stay in your home?" "Yes, ma'am, I suppose I am." "Why?" Ben's smile was slow and genuine. "Because sometimes a person needs help, and sometimes another person is in a position to provide it. Doesn't have to be more complicated than that." Charlotte looked around the platform, which was nearly empty now. The afternoon was wearing on, and the shadows were growing longer. She thought about the hotel Ben had described, about spending the night listening to drunken cowboys and wondering what she was going to do with the rest of her life. Then she looked back at Ben Cross, this gentle giant who'd approached a stranger in distress and offered sanctuary without asking for anything in return. "That's very kind of you, Mr. Cross, but I couldn't impose. It wouldn't be an imposition. Truth is, I don't get much company. Might be nice to have someone to talk to over supper." There was something in his tone, a loneliness that matched her own, that made Charlotte's decision for her. "All right," she said. "If you're certain it's no trouble." "No trouble at all." Ben reached for her carpet bag, and Charlotte noticed how his massive hand made it look like a child's toy. "My wagon's just over there." As they walked toward a sturdy buckboard loaded with supplies, Charlotte found herself stealing glances at her unlikely rescuer. Everything about him was oversized. His height, his hands, the breadth of his shoulders, but there was nothing intimidating about his manner. If anything, he seemed almost careful around her, as if he was acutely aware of the space he occupied and how it might affect others. "You're not from around here," Ben observed as he helped her up onto the wagon seat. "Boston," Charlotte said. "And you're right. I'm definitely not from around here." Ben climbed up beside her, and Charlotte was struck by how the wagon seemed to settle under his weight. "Boston's a long way from Montana territory. What brought you all this way?" Charlotte felt heat rise in her cheeks again. "I came to marry Mr. Higgins. Obviously, that didn't work out as planned." "His loss," Ben said simply, and something in his tone made Charlotte look at him sharply. "You don't even know me." "I know enough." Ben gathered the reins in his huge hands. "I know you traveled across the country to start a new life. I know you stood up to that fool even when he was trying to humiliate you publicly. And I know you've got enough courage to get in a wagon with a stranger, rather than give up on whatever brought you here in the first place." As the wagon pulled away from Copper Ridge, Charlotte found herself relaxing for the first time since stepping off the train. The Montana landscape rolled past them in waves of golden grass and distant mountains, vast and beautiful and intimidating all at once. "It's bigger than I imagined," she said softly. "Takes some getting used to," Ben agreed. "But once it gets into your blood, nowhere else feels quite like home." "You sound like you speak from experience." "Came out here about 10 years ago. Pennsylvania originally. Worked in the steel mills until I figured out I wasn't built for being underground all day." Charlotte glanced at his profile. The strong jaw, the weathered skin, the way his dark hair caught the afternoon light. "What do you do now?" "Bit of everything. Ranch work mostly. Some logging when the timber crews come through. Whatever needs doing." Ben paused. "Not as steady as mill work, but a man can breathe out here." As they rode, Charlotte found herself studying Ben's hands on the reins. They were the largest hands she'd ever seen, scarred and calloused from hard work, but somehow gentle in the way they guided the horses. Everything about him suggested immense physical strength held carefully in check. "Can I ask you something, Mr. Cross?" "Ben," he corrected. "And sure. Why did you help me? Really?" Ben was quiet for so long that Charlotte thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was thoughtful. "Ever feel like you don't quite fit anywhere? Like the world was built for different people, and you're just trying to find a corner where you can exist without causing problems?" Charlotte stared at him. "Yes, exactly like that." "Figured you might understand." Ben's smile was rueful. "Sometimes people like us need to look out for each other." As the sun began its descent toward the western mountains, casting everything in shades of gold and amber, Charlotte found herself thinking that maybe, just maybe, Walter Higgins's rejection might turn out to be the best thing that had ever happened to her. Ben's cabin sat in a clearing surrounded by towering pines, and Charlotte's first sight of it made her breath catch. It wasn't the rustic shack she'd been expecting, but a solid, well-built structure that spoke of both skill and care. The logs were perfectly fitted, the roof looked sound, and smoke curled invitingly from the stone chimney. "You built this yourself?" she asked as Ben helped her down from the wagon. "Every log and nail," he said with quiet pride. "Took the better part of 2 summers, but I wanted it done right." As they approached the front door, Charlotte noticed details that spoke of craftsmanship beyond mere functionality. The door was made of heavy planks, fitted together with precise joints. The windows were evenly spaced and properly framed. Even the porch steps were level and solid under her feet. "It's beautiful," she said, and meant it. Ben ducked his head as he opened the door, a gesture that reminded Charlotte of just how tall he was. "Like I said, nothing fancy, but it's home." The interior was a revelation. The main room was spacious and warm, dominated by a massive stone fireplace that was clearly Ben's own handiwork. The furniture, a sturdy table, several chairs, and a bookshelf lined with well-worn volumes, was all handmade, sized to accommodate its builder, but somehow managing not to overwhelm the space. "The spare room's just through there," Ben said, gesturing toward a door on the far side of the room. "It's not much, but the bed's comfortable, and the roof doesn't leak." Charlotte walked to the doorway and peered in. The room was small but cozy, with a narrow bed covered in a colorful quilt, a washstand, and a window that looked out toward the mountains. It was simple, clean, and more welcoming than anywhere she'd slept in months. "It's perfect," she said, turning back to find Ben watching her with an anxious expression. "You sure? I know it's not what you're used to." "Mr. Cross, Ben," Charlotte interrupted gently. "It's wonderful. Thank you." The relief on his face was almost comical. "Good. That's good. Are you hungry? I was planning on cooking some venison steaks for supper. Can I help?" Ben looked genuinely surprised by the offer. "You don't need to." "I'd like to. I'm a pretty good cook, despite what Mr. Higgins might think about my domestic capabilities." Something flickered in Ben's eyes at the mention of Walter Higgins. "That man's a fool. You keep saying that, but you don't know anything about my domestic capabilities either." Ben's smile was slow and warm. "Fair enough. Let's see what you can do with those steaks." Working together in Ben's kitchen was surprisingly easy. The space had clearly been designed by someone who cooked regularly. Everything was within reach, well organized and functional. But what struck Charlotte most was how Ben moved around her, always careful to give her space, never crowding or making her feel small, despite the obvious disparity in their sizes. She seasoned the meat while he stoked the fire in the cook stove. She prepared vegetables while he set the table with dishes that looked handmade but sturdy. The rhythm of shared domestic work was soothing in a way Charlotte hadn't expected. "You weren't kidding about being a good cook," Ben said as they sat down to eat. "This is the best meal I've had in months." "It's just salt and pepper," Charlotte protested, but she was pleased by the compliment. "Maybe, but there's something to be said for having someone care enough to season food properly." As they ate, Charlotte found herself studying Ben's face in the lamplight. He was handsome in a rugged, weathered way, but what struck her most was how gentle his expression was. For such a large, imposing man, he seemed remarkably peaceful. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "Shoot. Are you ever afraid that people are intimidated by you? Because of your size, I mean?" Ben paused with his fork halfway to his mouth. "Every day." The honesty of his answer surprised her. "Really?" "Charlotte, I'm 6'7" tall and weigh about 260 pounds. When I walk into a room, I'm usually the biggest thing in it. That makes some people nervous. But you're so gentle. That's exactly why people get nervous. They see the size first, then they see that I'm not using it to push people around, and they don't know what to make of me." Ben set down his fork. "It's like they can't figure out if I'm being genuinely nice or if I'm just biding my time before I show my true nature." Charlotte nodded slowly. "People made assumptions about me too, but for the opposite reason. They saw someone small and quiet and decided I must be weak or helpless." "Are you? Weak or helpless, I mean?" "No." The answer came without hesitation. "I've been taking care of myself since I was 16. I ran my aunt's dress shop for the last 2 years of her life. I made the decision to come west on my own, with my own money, to build my own life." Charlotte's voice grew stronger as she spoke. "I may be small, but I'm not fragile." "I believe you." Ben's brown eyes were serious. "And I think Walter Higgins is going to regret letting you get away." After supper, they sat by the fire with cups of coffee that Ben had brewed strong and dark. Charlotte curled up in one of the oversized chairs, feeling dwarfed by its proportions, but somehow comforted by the experience. Outside, the wind whispered through the pines, and somewhere in the distance, a coyote called to its pack. "It's so quiet," Charlotte murmured. "Too quiet?" It's wonderful. In Boston, there was always noise. Carriages, people shouting, machinery. You never really had silence." Ben stretched his long legs toward the fire. "That's one of the things I love about this place. A man can hear himself think." "What do you think about? When you're out here all alone?" Ben was quiet for a long moment, staring into the flames. "Lots of things. Sometimes I think about the past. Family I left behind, choices I made. Sometimes I think about the future, what I want to build, what kind of life I want to have. And what kind of life do you want?" Ben glanced at her, something unreadable in his expression. Something real. something that matters. Not just surviving day to day, but actually living. Charlotte felt something shift in her chest at his words. That's exactly what I was hoping to find out here. And instead, you found Walter Higgins. No, Charlotte said quietly. Instead, I found you. The words hung in the air between them, loaded with implications neither was quite ready to explore. Ben looked down at his hands and Charlotte found herself studying his profile in the firelight. The strong line of his jaw, the way his dark hair fell across his forehead. Charlotte, Ben said finally, what are you planning to do? Long term, I mean. It was the question she'd been dreading. I don't know. I have enough money to get back to Boston, but there's nothing for me there. And I can't stay here indefinitely imposing on your kindness. What if you could stay? Charlotte's heart gave a little skip. What do you mean? Ben turned to face her fully, his expression serious. What if there was a way for you to build that life you came looking for? Right here in Montana territory? I don't understand. Ben stood up and walked to the window, his large frame silhouetted against the glass. There's something I haven't told you about myself, Charlotte. Something that might change how you see this situation. Charlotte felt a flutter of anxiety. What kind of something? I'm not just a ranch hand who picks up odd jobs. Ben's voice was carefully controlled. I own land, quite a bit of it actually, about 800 acres of prime grazing land about 10 miles from here. Charlotte stared at him. You own a ranch? The land, yes, but not the buildings. Not yet. Ben turned back to face her. I've been planning to build a house. A real house, not just a cabin. Something big enough for a family. Ben, why are you telling me this? Ben took a deep breath. Because I have a proposition for you. Charlotte's heart was beating so fast she was sure he could hear it. What kind of proposition? Marry me. The words dropped into the quiet room like stones into still water. Charlotte felt her world tilt sideways. I beg your pardon? Ben held up a hand. Hear me out before you say anything. I'm not talking about some romantic fairy tale. I'm talking about a partnership, a business arrangement, if you will. Charlotte's mouth was suddenly dry. I don't understand. Ben began pacing the room, his long strides eating up the space. You need a place to belong, a way to build the life you came looking for. I need... He paused, searching for words. I need someone who understands what it's like to not quite fit. Someone who won't expect me to be something I'm not. But marriage would give you security, property, a position in the community, and it would give me companionship, someone to share the work and the rewards of building something lasting. Charlotte's mind was reeling. But we barely know each other. We know enough, Ben said quietly. I know you're brave and strong and kind. I know you're not afraid of hard work, and you're not looking for someone to take care of you. You're looking for someone to build something with. And what do you know about me, really? Besides the fact that I'm small enough to be dismissed by ranchers who want sturdy wives? Ben stopped pacing and crouched down in front of her chair, bringing his eyes level with hers. This close, Charlotte could see flecks of gold in his brown eyes, could smell the faint scent of pine and leather that seemed to cling to him. I know that when Walter Higgins was trying to humiliate you, you stood your ground. I know that when a strange man offered you shelter, you were brave enough to accept it rather than give up on your dreams. I know that you want to cook supper instead of being waited on, and I know that you see this place the way I do, as somewhere beautiful and peaceful and worth fighting for. Charlotte's breath was coming in short gasps. Ben, this is crazy. Maybe, but is it any crazier than traveling across the country to marry a man you'd never met based on a few letters? The truth of that hit Charlotte like a physical blow. That's different. Is it? At least with me, you know what you're getting. You've seen where I live, how I treat you, what kind of man I am. But we don't love each other. Ben's expression grew serious. No, we don't. Not yet. But I care about you already, Charlotte. More than I probably should after knowing you for half a day. And I think we could be happy together, if we both work at it. Charlotte stood up abruptly, needing space to think. She walked to the window and stared out at the moonlit forest, her mind churning. What would you expect from me? If I said yes, I mean, Partnership, Ben said immediately. In everything. Building the house, working the land, making decisions about our future. I don't want a housekeeper or a decoration, Charlotte. I want someone who'll be my equal in making a life worth living. And children, Ben was quiet for a moment. If they happen, I'd welcome them. But I'm not marrying you to get sons to carry on some legacy. I'm asking you to marry me because I think we could build something good together. Charlotte pressed her forehead against the cool glass. This is insane. Probably. I came here to marry one stranger, got rejected, and now I'm considering marrying another stranger. Yes. What if we're completely wrong about each other? What if we end up miserable? Ben moved to stand behind her, and Charlotte could feel the warmth radiating from his large body. Then we'll figure it out, together. Charlotte turned around and found herself looking up into Ben's face. In the moonlight, he looked even larger, more imposing, but somehow also more vulnerable. Why me, Ben? Really? Ben reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and gently touched her cheek. His hand was calloused and warm, and Charlotte found herself leaning into the touch despite herself. Because when I saw you standing on that platform, looking lost and hurt but not broken, something inside me recognized something inside you, he said quietly. Because I've been alone for a long time, and I'm tired of it, and because I think maybe you're tired of being alone too. Charlotte closed her eyes, feeling the warmth of his palm against her skin. When she opened them again, Ben was watching her with an expression of such gentle hope that it made her chest tight. If I said yes, she whispered, when would this happen? Tomorrow if you want. Judge Morrison makes a circuit through Copper Ridge once a week. He's due in town tomorrow afternoon. That's soon? Unless you want a big church wedding with all the trimmings. But somehow I don't think either of us is looking for that kind of spectacle. Charlotte thought about the small private ceremony Ben was describing, then contrasted it with the elaborate weddings she'd sewn dresses for in Boston. Productions designed more for show than for the joining of two hearts. No, she said slowly, I'm not looking for spectacle. So is that a yes? Charlotte looked up into Ben's face, at the hope and uncertainty she saw there. She thought about Walter Higgins and his cruel dismissal. She thought about the empty life waiting for her back in Boston. She thought about the way Ben had approached her on the platform, offering help without expecting anything in return. She thought about the cabin he'd built with his own hands, the way he moved around her with such careful consideration, the loneliness in his voice when he talked about hearing himself think in the silence. Yes, she whispered. It's a yes. Ben's smile was like sunrise breaking over the mountains. Really? Really, but Ben, anything. I want to see this land you're talking about, and I want to have a say in planning the house. Ben's laugh was rich and warm. Charlotte, if you're going to be my wife, you're going to have a say in everything. He pulled her into his arms then, and Charlotte was struck by how perfectly she fit against his chest, how his massive frame seemed to envelope her without overwhelming her. This was nothing like the romantic embraces she'd read about in novels. It was better. It was real and warm and full of promise. We're really going to do this, she murmured against his shirt. We really are. Ben's voice rumbled in his chest beneath her ear. Charlotte? Yes. Thank you. For what? For being brave enough to say yes to something completely insane. Charlotte pulled back to look up at him and saw her own mixture of excitement and terror reflected in his brown eyes. Thank you for asking, she said. And Ben? I think we're going to build something amazing together. As they stood there in the moonlight, holding each other and contemplating the enormity of what they'd just decided, Charlotte felt something she hadn't experienced since her parents died, the sense that she was exactly where she belonged. Tomorrow would bring a wedding, and the day after that would bring the beginning of a life she'd never dared to imagine. But tonight, in the arms of a gentle giant who'd seen her worth when others couldn't, Charlotte Wilson allowed herself to believe that sometimes the best things in life came disguised as disasters. The next morning dawned clear and bright, and Charlotte woke to the sound of an axe biting into wood. She dressed quickly and stepped outside to find Ben splitting logs behind the cabin, his massive frame moving with the easy rhythm of long practice. He'd removed his shirt in the morning warmth, and Charlotte found herself mesmerized by the play of muscles across his back and shoulders. She'd never seen a man built like Ben, not just tall, but proportioned on a scale that seemed almost mythical. Yet there was nothing threatening about his size as he worked. If anything, he seemed completely in control of his strength, using just enough force to split the logs cleanly without wasting energy. "Morning," he called when he noticed her watching. "Good morning?" Charlotte felt heat rise in her cheeks at being caught staring. "You're up early." "Old habit." Ben set down the axe and reached for his shirt. "Besides, I wanted to get some things done before we head into town." As he pulled the shirt over his head, Charlotte caught another glimpse of his torso. Broad chest, flat stomach, arms that looked like they could lift a grown man without effort. The sight made something flutter in her chest, an awareness of him as a man that she wasn't quite prepared for. "About today," she said, trying to focus on practical matters. "Are you certain Judge Morrison will be willing to perform the ceremony on such short notice?" Ben's smile was confident. "Owen Morrison's been after me to find myself a wife for years. He'll be thrilled to officiate." "And you're sure about this? About marrying someone you met yesterday?" Ben walked over to where she stood, moving with the careful grace she was beginning to associate with him. "Charlotte, I've never been more sure of anything in my life. But if you're having second thoughts—" "No," she said quickly. "No second thoughts. Just nerves, I suppose." "That's natural." Ben's expression grew serious. "But I want you to know something. Whatever happens between us, however this marriage turns out, you'll always have a home. I'll make sure of that." The sincerity in his voice made Charlotte's throat tight. "Thank you." They ate breakfast together, and then Ben hitched up the wagon for the trip to town. Before they left, he led Charlotte to a wooden chest in his bedroom and pulled out a small velvet box. "This was my mother's," he said, opening it to reveal a simple gold band set with a small but perfect diamond. "It's not much, but it's beautiful," Charlotte breathed and meant it. The ring was elegant in its simplicity, clearly made with love and care. "She always said it would go to my wife someday." Ben's voice was quiet. I never thought there'd be anyone who'd want to wear it." Charlotte looked up at him, seeing the vulnerability in his expression. "Ben, any woman would be honored to wear this ring. But will you?" In answer, Charlotte held out her left hand. Ben slipped the ring onto her finger with hands that were surprisingly gentle despite their size. It fit perfectly, as if it had been made for her. The ride to Copper Ridge was different from the day before. Yesterday, Charlotte had been a stranger in distress. Today, she was Ben's intended bride. The change in perspective made her see everything differently. The rolling countryside, the distant mountains, even the dusty little town that had seemed so unwelcoming 24 hours ago. "Ben," she said as they approached the outskirts of town, "what will people think? About us marrying so quickly, I mean. Honestly, most of them will think I'm the luckiest man in Montana territory. And the rest," Ben's jaw tightened slightly, "the rest will think what they always think, that I'm too big, too rough, too much for a lady like you. They'll figure you're either desperate or touched in the head to marry someone like me." Charlotte studied his profile, seeing the way his shoulders tensed as he spoke. "Is that what you think?" "Sometimes," he admitted. "But then I remember the way you looked at me yesterday. Not like I was some kind of mountain that needed to be climbed or avoided, but like I was just a man you might actually want to know. You are just a man, Ben, a good man. And you're sure you want to tie yourself to this particular man for the rest of your life?" Charlotte looked down at the ring on her finger, then at the strong hands holding the reins, then at the face of the man who'd rescued her from despair and offered her a future she'd never dared to imagine. "I'm sure." Judge Morrison turned out to be a portly man with kind eyes and a booming voice who seemed genuinely delighted by their request. "Ben Cross, you old hermit. I was beginning to think you'd sworn off human companionship entirely." "Just hadn't met the right person," Ben replied, his hand finding Charlotte's and squeezing gently. "Well, Miss Wilson, I hope you know what you're getting yourself into. This man could build a house with nothing but his bare hands and a handful of nails." "Actually," Charlotte said, "I'm counting on it." The ceremony was brief but meaningful, held in Judge Morrison's office with his clerk and his wife as witnesses. Charlotte had worried that it might feel cold or impersonal, but something about the simplicity made it feel more real than any elaborate church wedding could have. When Ben slipped his mother's ring onto Charlotte's finger and promised to love and protect her for the rest of his life, his voice was steady and sure. When Charlotte promised to stand by him through whatever challenges life might bring, she meant every word. "You may kiss your bride," Judge Morrison announced with evident satisfaction. Ben turned to Charlotte, his brown eyes asking permission, even though they were already married. She nodded, and he bent down to press his lips gently to hers. The kiss was soft, careful, full of promise rather than passion. When they broke apart, Charlotte felt something fundamental shift inside her. She was no longer Charlotte Wilson, alone in the world. She was Charlotte Cross, with a husband and a home, and a future stretching out before her. "Congratulations, Mrs. Cross," Ben murmured, and the sound of her new name made Charlotte's heart skip. After the ceremony, they walked through town as husband and wife, Ben's massive presence drawing the usual curious stares. But this time, Charlotte didn't feel exposed or vulnerable. With Ben's steady presence beside her, she felt protected, valued, ready to face whatever challenges Montana territory might throw at them. "Mrs. Cross," Ben said as they climbed back into the wagon, "are you ready to see your new home?" "Our new home," Charlotte corrected. "And yes, I'm ready." The land Ben owned was even more beautiful than Charlotte had imagined. Rolling meadows stretched toward distant mountains, bisected by a clear stream that would provide water for both house and livestock. Ancient pines dotted the landscape, providing windbreaks and shade. It was vast and open and full of possibilities. "Where were you thinking of building the house?" Charlotte asked as they stood on a gentle rise overlooking the valley. Ben pointed to a spot about halfway up the slope. "There, close enough to the stream for water, high enough to avoid flooding, with a good view of the surrounding land." Charlotte studied the location, trying to envision the home they would build together. "How big were you thinking?" "Big enough for a family," Ben said. 4 bedrooms, maybe 5, a large kitchen and dining area, a front porch where we can sit and watch the sunset. "And a workshop," Charlotte added, "somewhere I can set up my sewing machine and take in alteration work." Ben looked surprised. "You want to keep working?" "I like having something that's mine, something I'm good at. Is that all right?" "More than all right." Ben's smile was warm. "I want you to be happy, Charlotte, whatever that takes." They spent the afternoon walking the property, with Ben pointing out the best spots for a garden, where the cattle would graze, where they'd build a barn and outbuildings. With each detail, Charlotte felt more connected to this place, more invested in the life they were planning together. "When can we start building?" she asked as they returned to the wagon. "Tomorrow if you want. I've already got most of the materials stockpiled, and I know some men in town who'd be willing to help with the heavy work." "You've been planning this for a while." "Years," Ben admitted. "I just never had anyone to build it for." That evening, back at Ben's cabin, they sat by the fire and talked about their plans. Charlotte sketched rough floor plans on a piece of paper, while Ben described the techniques he'd use for construction. It was domestic and intimate, and surprisingly natural. "Ben," Charlotte said as they prepared for bed, "about tonight." She felt her cheeks burn with embarrassment, but Ben's expression was understanding. "Charlotte, we're married, but that doesn't mean anything has to happen between us until you're ready. I meant what I said about this being a partnership. That includes everything." The relief in Charlotte's chest was overwhelming. "Thank you. We have time," Ben said gently. "All the time in the world." That night, Charlotte lay in the small guest room that was now temporarily her own, listening to the sounds of Ben moving around in the main part of the cabin. She was married to a man she'd known for less than 48 hours, a man who was offering to build her a house with his bare hands, asking nothing in return but her companionship. It should have been terrifying. Instead, as Charlotte drifted off to sleep, she felt more hopeful than she had in years. The construction began at dawn 3 days later. Charlotte woke to the sound of wagons arriving and men's voices calling greetings to Ben. She dressed quickly and stepped outside to find what looked like half the men in Copper Ridge gathered around stacks of lumber, their breath visible in the crisp morning air. "Morning, Mrs. Cross," called a grizzled man with arms like tree trunks. "I'm Sam Hutchins. Mighty pleased to meet you." "Thank you for coming to help," Charlotte replied, suddenly aware that she was the only woman present. "Wouldn't miss it," said another man. "Ben's been talking about building this house for 3 years. About time he had someone worth building it for." Ben appeared at Charlotte's side, and she was struck again by how he towered over even these rugged frontier men. "Charlotte, these are some of the finest carpenters and craftsmen in the territory. They've agreed to help us raise the frame." "That's very generous." "Not generous," Sam Hutchins grinned. "Smart. Ben's helped every one of us with one project or another over the years. About time we returned the favor." As the day progressed, Charlotte watched in amazement as Ben orchestrated the construction with quiet efficiency. He clearly planned every detail in advance: where each beam would go, how the frame would be assembled, what sequence of operations would be most efficient. But what struck her most was watching Ben work with his own hands. She'd known he was strong, but seeing him in action was something else entirely. He could lift beams that required two other men to handle. When they needed to position a particularly heavy crossbeam, Ben simply picked it up and held it in place while the others secured it. "Never seen anything like it," one of the men muttered to his companion. "He's strong as a ox, but gentle as a lamb." Charlotte found herself mesmerized by the sight of her husband at work. His shirt was soon soaked with sweat despite the cool morning air, and he'd pushed his sleeves up to reveal forearms that were corded with muscle. Every movement was controlled, precise, powerful without being wasteful. When the men broke for lunch, Charlotte had sandwiches and coffee ready. Ben approached her with wood shavings in his dark hair and a smile that made her heart skip. "What do you think so far?" he asked, gesturing toward the skeletal frame rising from the foundation. "It's going to be beautiful," Charlotte said honestly, "and huge. Too big. Number perfect." Charlotte handed him a sandwich and a cup of coffee. "Ben, watching you work, I had no idea you were so skilled." Ben's cheeks colored slightly. "Just picked up things over the years." "It's more than that. You have a gift." "Maybe, but having something worth building makes all the difference." In the afternoon, Charlotte found ways to help. She couldn't lift heavy timbers, but she could sort nails, measure lumber, and hold smaller pieces in place while Ben secured them. Working alongside him, she was constantly aware of his size and strength, but also of how careful he was never to crowd her or make her feel useless. "Hand me that level," he said as they worked on ensuring a wall was perfectly plumb. Charlotte passed him the tool and their hands brushed. The contact sent a little shock through her system, and she found herself looking up into Ben's face. For a moment, they were both still, staring at each other in the afternoon sunlight. "Charlotte," Ben said softly. "Yes." But whatever he'd been about to say was interrupted by Sam Hutchins calling for help with another beam. The moment passed, but Charlotte found herself thinking about the way Ben had looked at her. Not like she was a burden or an ornament, but like she was exactly where she belonged. By evening, the basic frame of the house was complete. The men gathered around a fire Ben built in what would eventually be the front yard, sharing a bottle of whiskey and telling stories. Charlotte sat on a log beside Ben, feeling the warmth of his presence and the satisfaction of a day's work well done. "To Ben and Charlotte Cross," Sam Hutchins called out, raising his cup, "may your house be strong and your marriage be happy." "Hear, hear," the other men chorused. As the evening wore on and the men began heading home, Charlotte found herself alone with Ben beside the dying fire. The frame of their house loomed against the starlit sky, all angles and possibilities. "It's really happening," she said softly, having second thoughts. "Number just amazed, I suppose. Yesterday this was just land and lumber. Tomorrow it'll be our home." Ben poked at the fire with a stick, sending sparks dancing into the darkness. "Charlotte, can I ask you something?" "Of course. Are you happy? Really happy? Not just making the best of things?" Charlotte considered the question seriously. "Ben, 3 days ago, I was sleeping alone in your guest room, wondering what I was going to do with my life. Tonight I'm sitting beside my husband, watching our house take shape. Yes, I'm happy. Are you?" Ben's smile was visible in the firelight. "Happier than I ever thought I deserved to be." "What do you mean?" Ben was quiet for a moment. Charlotte, I've been alone for a long time. Not just without a wife, but really alone. People see me as useful, I suppose. Someone to call when you need heavy lifting or dangerous work done, but not someone you'd want to spend an evening talking to. That's their loss. Maybe, but it gets lonely, being the giant everyone keeps at arm's length. Charlotte reached over and took his hand, marveling at how her fingers disappeared into his palm. You're not alone anymore. Ben squeezed her hand gently. I'm not. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the embers glow and listening to the night sounds of the wilderness around them. Charlotte found herself studying Ben's profile in the dying firelight. The strong jaw, the straight nose, the way his dark hair fell across his forehead. Ben, she said suddenly, why didn't you ever marry before? I mean, really. You're handsome, successful, kind. There must have been women who would have been interested. Ben's laugh was rueful. You'd think so, wouldn't you? But it turns out most women find my size intimidating. In what way? Every way. They worry I'll hurt them without meaning to. They worry about what people will think, seeing them with someone like me. They worry about having children who might be as big as I am. Ben's voice was matter-of-fact, but Charlotte could hear the pain beneath the words. Their loss, she said firmly. You're not worried about any of those things? Charlotte considered the question seriously. Ben, you're the gentlest man I've ever met. Yes, you're big, but I've never felt safer with anyone in my life. As for what people think, she shrugged. People are going to think what they want regardless. And about children. Charlotte felt her cheeks warm. If we're blessed with children, I hope they're exactly like you. Ben stared at her. You mean that? Every word. Ben was quiet for so long that Charlotte began to worry she'd said something wrong. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough with emotion. Charlotte, I need you to know something. This may have started as a practical arrangement, but it's not anymore. Not for me. Charlotte's heart began to pound. What do you mean? I mean I'm falling in love with you. Maybe I was already falling in love with you yesterday when I saw you standing on that platform, but I definitely am now. The confession hung in the air between them, honest and vulnerable and terrifying. Charlotte felt something flutter in her chest, something that might have been fear or might have been joy. Ben, you don't have to say anything. I just wanted you to know. Whatever this becomes, I'm in it completely. Charlotte looked at this man, her husband, who just offered her his heart with the same quiet courage he'd shown in everything else. She thought about the way he'd rescued her without expecting anything in return, the way he'd included her in planning their house, the way he moved around her with such careful consideration. I'm falling in love with you too, she whispered. Ben's eyes widened. Really? Really? I didn't expect to, but I am. Ben reached out slowly and cupped her face in his massive hands. Charlotte, may I kiss you? Really kiss you this time? In answer, Charlotte leaned into him. When Ben's lips met hers, the kiss was nothing like the careful peck they'd shared during their wedding ceremony. This was real and warm, and full of all the feelings they'd been dancing around for days. When they finally broke apart, Charlotte was breathing hard. Oh, Ben's smile was gentle and amused. I never knew kissing could feel like that. Like what? Like coming home. Ben's expression grew serious. Charlotte, I want you to know that we can take this as slow as you need. I don't want you to feel pressured. Charlotte silenced him by rising up on her toes and kissing him again. This time she let herself really feel it. The warmth of his lips, the careful way his hands cradled her face, the way her entire body seemed to come alive at his touch. I don't want to go slow, she said when they broke apart. I want to be your wife in every way. Ben's eyes darkened. Are you sure? I've never been more sure of anything. Ben stood up and gently pulled Charlotte to her feet. Then let's go home, Mrs. Cross. Hand in hand, they walked back toward Ben's cabin, their cabin, while behind them, the frame of their future home stood silhouetted against the star-filled Montana sky. 3 weeks later, Charlotte stood in what would be the kitchen of their new house, supervising the installation of the massive stone fireplace Ben was building with his own hands. The walls were up now, the roof on, and the interior was taking shape with remarkable speed. "A little to the left," she called out as Ben maneuvered a particularly large stone into place. "Left it is," Ben replied, his voice slightly strained from the effort. Even for him, the stones were heavy. Charlotte had discovered that marriage to Ben was nothing like she'd expected, in the best possible way. He consulted her on every decision, from the placement of windows to the design of built-in cabinets. More importantly, he listened to her suggestions and actually implemented them. "The pantry should have more shelves," she'd said while studying his plans. "You're right," Ben had agreed immediately and added more shelves. "The front porch needs to be deeper so we can sit outside in bad weather." Good thinking. And the porch was redesigned. It was a partnership in the truest sense of the word, and Charlotte found herself flourishing in ways she'd never imagined possible. "How's that?" Ben asked, stepping back to examine his work. "Perfect," Charlotte said, and meant it. The fireplace was a work of art, massive enough to heat the large room, but somehow elegant in its proportions. Ben wiped his hands on a rag and walked over to where Charlotte stood. Even after 3 weeks of marriage, she still felt a little thrill when he approached. He was so big, so imposing, but his expression when he looked at her was always so gentle. "Penny for your thoughts," he said, wrapping his arms around her from behind. Charlotte leaned back against his chest, marveling at how perfectly she fit against him. "Just thinking about how different this is from what I expected when I got on that train in Boston. Good different or bad different? The best different." Charlotte turned in his arms to face him. "Ben, do you ever wonder what would have happened if Walter Higgins had accepted me?" Ben's expression grew serious. "Sometimes, and then I thank God he was too stupid to see what he was throwing away. I used to think there was something wrong with me. Too small, too quiet, too forgettable. There's nothing forgettable about you, Charlotte Cross." Ben's voice was firm. "You're the strongest person I know." "I don't feel strong." "No? You traveled across the country alone to build a new life. When you were rejected and humiliated, you picked yourself up and took a chance on a complete stranger. You've learned to use tools you'd never seen before, planned a house from the ground up, and made a home in a place that's nothing like anywhere you've ever lived." Ben's eyes were warm with pride. "If that's not strength, I don't know what is." Charlotte felt tears prick her eyes. "When you put it like that, it's not how I put it. It's how it is." They were interrupted by the sound of a wagon approaching. Through the window, Charlotte could see a familiar figure driving toward them. "Walter Higgins," Ben said, his voice flat. "What do you suppose he wants?" Ben's jaw tightened. "Only one way to find out." They walked outside together, Ben's hand resting protectively on Charlotte's back. Walter climbed down from his wagon, looking significantly less confident than he had 3 weeks ago. "Mr. Cross, Mrs. Dot." He paused, clearly struggling with Charlotte's new name. "Mrs. Cross," Charlotte said firmly. "Right, Mrs. Cross." Walter cleared his throat. "I heard you two got married. Congratulations." "Thank you," Ben said, his tone polite but cold. Walter shifted uncomfortably, clearly working up to something. "Actually, I was hoping to speak with Mrs. Cross privately. Anything you have to say to my wife, you can say in front of me," Ben replied. Walter glanced nervously at Ben's imposing frame. "I suppose. Well, the thing is, I've been thinking about what happened at the train station." "And?" Charlotte asked, though she thought she knew where this was going. "I may have been hasty in my judgment. Rash, even." Charlotte felt Ben tense beside her. "Meaning?" Walter straightened his shoulders, apparently gathering courage. "Meaning I'd like to offer you a second chance. The position of my wife is still open, and I'm prepared to overlook your physical limitations." The silence that followed was deafening. Charlotte could practically feel the anger radiating from Ben's massive frame, but when she glanced up at him, his expression was carefully controlled. "That's very generous of you, Mr. Higgins," Charlotte said carefully. "But as you noted, I'm already married." "That can be fixed," Walter said quickly. "Marriages can be annulled if they haven't been properly consummated." This time Ben did move, stepping slightly in front of Charlotte in a gesture that was both protective and threatening. Mr. Higgins, I suggest you choose your next words very carefully. Walter held up his hands. Now don't get violent. I'm just saying that a woman of Mrs. Cross's breeding shouldn't be stuck in a marriage of convenience when she could have a proper home and position in society. A marriage of convenience? Charlotte's voice was dangerously quiet. Well, yes, I mean, look at him. Walter gestured toward Ben as if he were a particularly large piece of furniture. What else could it be? No offense, Cross, but a lady like her. He trailed off, apparently realizing he was digging himself into a hole. A lady like me, what? Charlotte asked. Walter floundered. A lady of education and refinement. Surely you can see that you'd be better suited to a man of your own stature. My stature? Charlotte felt anger building in her chest like steam in a kettle. Size, I mean. Social standing. You know what I mean? Actually, I don't think I do. Please enlighten me. Ben placed a gentle hand on Charlotte's shoulder. Charlotte, you don't need to. No. Charlotte shook off his hand and stepped forward. I want to hear this. Please, Mr. Higgins, explain to me why I'd be better off with you than with my husband. Walter looked confused by her tone. Well, I'm educated, successful. I have a proper house and social standing in the community. Cross here is just well, he's a laborer. I see. Charlotte's voice was calm, but Ben could see the storm building in her eyes. And what exactly do you know about my husband, Mr. Higgins? He's big and strong, I suppose, good for manual labor. He built this house with his own hands, Charlotte said, gesturing toward the beautiful structure rising behind them. Every beam, every board, every nail. He designed it, planned it, and supervised its construction. Well, yes, but he owns 800 acres of prime grazing land. He's respected by every man in this territory. He's gentle and kind and intelligent and thoughtful. Charlotte's voice was rising with each word. He's the finest man I've ever met, and I'm honored to be his wife. Walter looked genuinely confused. But surely you can see that a woman of your size would be better matched with what? Someone small-minded enough to judge a person's worth by their physical appearance? Someone shallow enough to think that social standing matters more than character? Charlotte was fully angry now. You're right about one thing, Mr. Higgins. I am too good for you, but not because of my size or education or breeding, because I have enough sense to recognize quality when I see it. Walter's face was turning red. Now see here. No, you see here. Charlotte stepped forward, and despite the fact that she barely came up to Walter's shoulder, he actually took a step back. 3 weeks ago, you humiliated me in public because you decided I was too small to be useful to you. Today, you show up at my home and insult my husband, trying to convince me that I should abandon the best thing that ever happened to me for the privilege of being your wife. I'm offering you a better life. A better life? Charlotte laughed, but there was no humor in it. Mr. Higgins, I have never been happier in my entire life. I have a husband who treats me as an equal, a home we're building together, and a future full of possibilities. You're offering me a life as your property, valued only for my ability to serve your needs and boost your standing in the community. That's exactly what it is. And frankly, I'd rather live in a tent with Ben than in a mansion with you. Walter looked to Ben, apparently hoping for male solidarity. Surely you can see that she'd be better off with her own kind. Ben's voice, when he finally spoke, was deceptively calm. Mr. Higgins, my wife is my kind. She's brave and strong and beautiful and everything I never dared to hope for. The fact that you can't see, that just proves what an idiot you are. You can't talk to me like that. I can talk to you however I please. This is my land, and you're not welcome on it. Walter sputtered. You can't throw me off. I can, and I will. Ben took a step forward, and suddenly Walter seemed to remember exactly how big and strong Ben actually was. Fine, Walter said, backing toward his wagon, but don't come crying to me when you realize what a mistake you've made. The only mistake I made, Charlotte called after him, was wasting 3 minutes of my life listening to you. They watched Walter drive away, his wagon raising a cloud of dust as he fled. When he was out of sight, Ben turned to Charlotte with an expression of such pride and admiration that it made her knees weak. That was magnificent, he said. Was it? I feel like I might have been a bit harsh. Harsh? Ben laughed and swept Charlotte up in his arms, spinning her around until she squealed with laughter. Charlotte, you were perfect. Absolutely perfect. When he set her down, they were both breathless and grinning. I can't believe he thought I'd leave you for him. I can't believe he thought he could come here and insult you to your face. Charlotte sobered slightly. Ben, you know what he said about marriages of convenience. We never really talked about whether people think. Ben silenced her with a kiss that was thorough and possessive and left no doubt about his feelings. When they broke apart, Charlotte was dizzy. Does that feel like convenience to you? Ben asked, his voice rough. No, Charlotte whispered. It feels like love. Because it is love. I love you, Charlotte Cross. Not because it's convenient or practical or socially appropriate. Because you're you. Because you make me want to be the best man I can be. Because when I look at you, I see my whole future. Charlotte felt tears spill over onto her cheeks. I love you too. So much it scares me sometimes. Good scared or bad scared? Good scared. The kind of scared that comes from finally having something worth being afraid to lose? Ben cupped her face in his hands, wiping away her tears with his thumbs. You're not going to lose me, Charlotte. Not ever. Promise? I promise. You're stuck with me for the rest of your life. Charlotte laughed through her tears. Good, because I plan to hold you to that. As the sun set behind them, painting their new house in shades of gold and amber, Ben and Charlotte stood together in the place they were building their life. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, more work, the endless tasks of creating a home and a future. But tonight, with Walter Higgins's foolish proposal behind them, and their love declared and witnessed by the Montana sky, they were exactly where they belonged. Come on, Mrs. Cross, Ben said, taking her hand. Let's go home. Which home? Charlotte asked with a smile. The cabin or the house? Wherever you are, Ben replied. That's home. 6 months later, Charlotte stood in the kitchen of their completed house, putting the finishing touches on a birthday cake. Through the window, she could see Ben in the front yard, teaching a group of local children how to carve wooden toys. His massive hands guided small fingers with infinite patience as he showed them how to shape the wood without cutting themselves. The sight made Charlotte's heart full in ways she was still discovering. Ben had such a gift with children. His size, which intimidated many adults, seemed to fascinate the young ones. They climbed on him like he was a friendly mountain, and he bore their attention with gentle good humor. Mrs. Cross, came a voice from behind her. Charlotte turned to find Sarah Hutchins, Sam's wife, standing in the doorway with her arms full of wildflowers. These are for the birthday celebration. I thought they'd look nice on the table. They're beautiful, thank you. Charlotte accepted the flowers and began arranging them in a vase Ben had carved from a piece of burl. How many people do you think will come? Half the territory, I suspect, Sarah said with a laugh. Ben's done favors for just about everyone around here at one time or another. They're all eager to celebrate with him. It was true. In the months since their marriage, Charlotte had discovered that Ben was beloved throughout the region. Not just respected for his strength and skill, but genuinely liked for his character. People sought him out when they needed help, knowing he'd never turn away someone in need. Sarah, Charlotte said as she worked with the flowers, can I ask you something? Of course. When you and Sam first heard about our marriage, what did you think? Sarah paused in her arrangement of dishes on the long table they'd set up for the party. Honestly, I thought Ben had finally gotten lucky, and I thought you were either very brave or very smart. Probably both. Charlotte felt a flush of pleasure. Really? Really? Oh, I'll admit there was some talk at first. People wondering if it was real or just practical, but one look at the two of you together and nobody had any doubts. What do you mean? Sarah smiled. Charlotte, I've been married for 15 years. I know what love looks like, and when Ben looks at you, she shook her head. That man is completely, utterly devoted to you, and you glow when he walks into a room. Before Charlotte could respond, the front door opened and Ben himself appeared, ducking slightly out of habit even though he'd built the door frame tall enough to accommodate his height. How are things coming in here, he asked, and Charlotte felt that familiar flutter in her chest at the sound of his voice. Almost ready, she said, going up on her toes to kiss his cheek. Are the children having fun? They're carving enough toys to stock a shop, Ben said with a grin, though I think they're more interested in the cake than the woodworking. Speaking of cake, Sarah said, I should go help Sam with the barbecue pit. He tends to char things when left to his own devices. After Sarah left, Ben wrapped his arms around Charlotte from behind, and she leaned back against his chest with a contented sigh. Happy birthday, husband, she murmured. Best birthday I've ever had, Ben replied, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. Even though you're officially an old man now. 35 isn't that old. Ancient, Charlotte teased. I'll have to start taking care of you in your declining years. Ben's laugh rumbled through his chest. I'll hold you to that. They stood together in comfortable silence, looking out at the gathering crowd of friends and neighbors. Charlotte marveled at how much her life had changed in less than a year. She'd gone from being a lonely seamstress with no prospects to being the wife of one of the most respected men in Montana territory, with a home she loved and friends who valued her. Charlotte, Ben said quietly, there's something I want to give you. It's your birthday. I should be giving you presents. This is for both of us, actually. Ben pulled away and walked to the kitchen counter, where he picked up a folded piece of paper. This came in the mail yesterday. Charlotte took the paper and unfolded it, revealing an official-looking document with several signatures and seals. As she read, her eyes widened. Ben, this is a deed. To the land adjoining ours, the Morrison place. It came up for sale last week, and I thought... He trailed off, suddenly uncertain. I thought we might want to expand, for the future. Charlotte stared at the deed, then at her husband. You bought more land? 800 more acres, prime grazing land, with water rights to Morrison Creek. Ben's expression was anxious. I should have discussed it with you first, but I wanted it to be a surprise. If you don't like it... Charlotte silenced him by throwing her arms around his neck and kissing him thoroughly. When they broke apart, she was grinning. I love it. I love you. And I love that you're thinking about our future. Our future, Ben repeated as if testing the words. I like the sound of that. Good, because I have news too. Oh, Charlotte took a deep breath. I'm pregnant. Ben went completely still. You're about 3 months along, I think. I wanted to be sure before I told you. For a moment, Ben didn't react at all. Then his face split into the biggest smile Charlotte had ever seen, and he picked her up and spun her around, whooping with joy. Charlotte, you're going to have a baby. We're going to have a baby, she corrected, laughing as he spun her. A baby, Ben said wonderingly, setting her down but keeping his hands on her waist. Our baby. Are you happy? Happy? Ben's eyes were bright with unshed tears. Charlotte, I've never been happier in my entire life. Even if the baby is as big as you are, especially if the baby is as big as I am, and as beautiful and strong and perfect as you are. They were interrupted by the sound of more arrivals, and soon the yard was full of friends and neighbors who'd come to celebrate Ben's birthday. There was music and dancing, games for the children, and more food than Charlotte had ever seen in one place. As the evening wore on, Charlotte found herself standing on the front porch of their beautiful home, watching the celebration unfold below. Ben was in the yard, playing fiddle with the other musicians, his deep voice adding harmony to the traditional songs. Children ran between the adults, shrieking with laughter. Couples danced on the makeshift dance floor Sam and his friends had constructed. Quite a sight, isn't it? Came a voice beside her. Charlotte turned to find Judge Morrison climbing the porch steps, a plate of food in one hand and a glass of punch in the other. It is, Charlotte agreed. I never imagined when I came west that I'd find myself part of something like this. Community's important out here, the judge said, settling into one of the rocking chairs Ben had built for the porch. People depend on each other in ways they don't back east. Ben seems to be at the center of it all. Ben's special, Judge Morrison said simply. Always has been. Some men are just born to be the kind of person others can rely on. Even when he was younger? Even then. I've known Ben for 8 years since he first came to the territory. He was just a kid, really, barely out of his teens. But even then, you could see what he was going to become. Charlotte settled into the chair beside the judge. What do you mean? Well, take the winter of '78 We had the worst blizzard in living memory. Lasted for days, buried half the territory under 10 feet of snow. People were trapped, supplies were running low, and there was real fear that some folks wouldn't make it through. Charlotte leaned forward, intrigued. What happened? Ben happened. He strapped on snowshoes and started making rounds, checking on everyone within a 20-mile radius. Found the Peterson family nearly frozen to death in their cabin when their roof collapsed. Carried all 5 of them to safety on his back, one by one. Found old Henrik Larson trapped under a fallen tree, dug him out, and nursed him back to health. That sounds like Ben, Charlotte said softly. Spent 3 weeks doing nothing but rescuing people and delivering supplies. Never asked for thanks, never expected payment. Just saw what needed doing and did it. Judge Morrison took a sip of his punch. That's when folks around here realized Ben Cross wasn't just big and strong, he was good. And in a place like this, that matters more than anything. Charlotte watched her husband in the yard below, still playing music with the other men, his face alive with joy and contentment. It was hard to reconcile this celebration with the lonely man she'd first met, the one who'd spoken of being too big for other people's comfort. Judge Morrison, she said, when Ben and I got married, did they think it was strange? A man like him marrying someone like me? The judge studied her with kind eyes. What do you think they thought? I think they thought he was too good for me, or that I was using him somehow. Judge Morrison chuckled. Charlotte, you've got it backwards. Most folks thought you were too good for him. Charlotte stared at him. What? Oh, they respected Ben, don't get me wrong. But he'd been alone so long, they'd started to think of him as permanently unmarried. When word got around that an educated lady from Boston had agreed to marry him, the general consensus was that Ben had somehow convinced an angel to take pity on him. But that's not... Charlotte shook her head. Judge, Ben saved me. I was stranded and humiliated and completely lost. He offered me shelter and kindness and a future I never dared hope for. And he would say you saved him right back, gave him someone to build for, someone to care for, someone to love. Judge Morrison smiled. That's what good marriages are, Charlotte. 2 people saving each other. Below them, the music changed to a slower song, and couples began pairing off for dancing. Ben looked up toward the porch, his eyes finding Charlotte automatically. When their gazes met, his smile was so warm and full of love that it made her breath catch. Looks like your husband wants a dance, Judge Morrison observed. Ben was already walking toward the porch, his long strides eating up the distance. Mrs. Cross, he said when he reached them, would you do me the honor? Charlotte stood and took his offered hand. I'd be delighted, Mr. Cross. As Ben led her down to the makeshift dance floor, Charlotte was aware of the other couples making room for them, not out of fear or deference, but out of respect and affection. These people genuinely cared about Ben, and by extension, about her. Ben's arms encircled her carefully, and they began to move to the music. After months of marriage, they'd found their rhythm. Charlotte had learned to follow his lead, and Ben had learned to adjust his long stride to match her shorter steps. Enjoying your party? Charlotte asked as they swayed together. Best party I've ever had, Ben replied. Best year I've ever had. Even with all the work of building the house? Especially because of that, every day watching our home take shape, seeing you make it beautiful. Ben's voice was soft with emotion. Charlotte, a year ago I was just surviving. Now I'm living. So am I. They danced in comfortable silence for a while, surrounded by friends and neighbors but lost in their own world. Charlotte rested her head against Ben's chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart, feeling completely safe and cherished in his arms. Ben, she said softly, are you nervous about the baby? Terrified, he admitted with a chuckle. What if I'm too rough? What if I hurt the baby without meaning to? You won't. How can you be so sure? Charlotte pulled back to look up at him. Because I've watched you with children, you're incredibly gentle. And because I've seen how you treat everything you care about, with patience and tenderness and absolute devotion. What if the baby doesn't like me? Impossible, Charlotte said firmly. The baby is going to adore you, just like I do. Ben's expression grew serious. Charlotte, I want you to know something. This baby, this family we're creating, It's more than I ever dared to dream of. If someone had told me a year ago that I'd be married to the most wonderful woman in the territory, with a child on the way and friends to help us celebrate, I'd have thought they were crazy. And now? Now I think maybe sometimes crazy dreams come true. The song ended, but they didn't break apart immediately. They stood there in the middle of the dance floor, holding each other, surrounded by the warm glow of friendship and community. "Ladies and gentlemen," Judge Morrison called out from the porch, "if I could have your attention for a moment." The crowd quieted and turned toward the judge. Ben and Charlotte remained in each other's arms, curious about what he had to say. "We're here tonight to celebrate Ben Cross's birthday," Judge Morrison began, "but I think we're really celebrating something bigger than that. We're celebrating the kind of man Ben is, and the kind of life he's built here in Montana Territory." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. 8 years ago, a young man came to our territory with nothing but his strength and his determination to build something good. In the time since, he's become not just a neighbor, but a friend to everyone here. He's helped us build our homes, raise our barns, rescue our livestock, and protect our families. "Here, here," called out Sam Hutchins. "But more than that," Judge Morrison continued, "he's shown us what it means to be a good man, to use your strength to help others, not to dominate them, to be generous with your time and energy, to treat everyone with dignity and respect." Charlotte felt tears prick her eyes as she listened to the litany of Ben's virtues. She looked up at her husband and saw that he was deeply moved by the judge's words. "And now," Judge Morrison said, "he's found himself a partner worthy of him. Charlotte Cross has brought grace and intelligence and beauty to our community. She's proven that the right woman can see past the surface to the heart of a good man." The crowd applauded, and Charlotte felt her cheeks burn with pleased embarrassment. "So let's raise our glasses," Judge Morrison concluded, "to Ben and Charlotte Cross. May their marriage be long and happy. May their home be filled with laughter and love. And may they continue to be an example to all of us of what it means to build something beautiful together." "To Ben and Charlotte," the crowd chorused, raising their glasses high. As the celebration continued around them, Ben and Charlotte found a quiet moment on the porch swing he'd built for lazy evenings. The party was winding down, with some guests beginning to head home, while others showed no signs of leaving anytime soon. "That was quite a speech," Charlotte said, snuggling against Ben's side. "Made me sound better than I am. Made you sound exactly like you are." Charlotte tilted her head to look up at him. "Ben, do you realize how loved you are? How much you mean to these people? They're good people, good neighbors. They're more than that. They're family. And they see you the way I see you, as someone special, someone worth celebrating." Ben was quiet for a long moment, his arm tightening around Charlotte. "You know what the best part of tonight was?" "What?" "Watching you be part of it all. Seeing you laugh with Sarah Hutchins, help serve the food, dance with Sam's little boy. You belong here, Charlotte. You're not just my wife. You're part of this community." "It doesn't feel real sometimes," Charlotte admitted. "A year ago, I was completely alone in the world. Now I have a husband who loves me, friends who care about me, and a baby on the way. It feels like a dream." "If it's a dream, then I hope we never wake up." They sat together in comfortable silence, watching the last of the sunset paint the sky in shades of rose and gold. In the yard below, a few couples were still dancing to the soft music of a single fiddle. Children ran between the adults, their laughter mixing with the low murmur of conversation. "Ben," Charlotte said suddenly, "I want to tell you something." "What's that?" "When I was growing up, I used to dream about what my life would be like when I was older. I imagined a husband who would love me, a home of my own, children to care for. But I never imagined anything like this." "Like what?" "Like being so completely, perfectly happy. Like finding someone who not only accepts me exactly as I am, but makes me feel like I'm everything he ever wanted." Ben turned to face her more fully. "Charlotte, you are everything I ever wanted. Everything I never dared to want. Promise me something. Anything. Promise me we'll always remember this feeling. This happiness, this contentment, this sense that we're exactly where we belong." "I promise," Ben said solemnly, "and I promise that whatever challenges we face, Whatever changes come our way, we'll face them together. Together, Charlotte agreed. As the stars appeared overhead and the last of their guests prepared to leave, Ben and Charlotte remained on their porch swing, holding each other and contemplating the life they'd built. In a few months, there would be a baby to care for. In the years to come, there would be new challenges, new adventures, new reasons to be grateful for the twist of fate that had brought them together. But tonight, on Ben's 35th birthday, with their friends surrounding them and their love stronger than ever, they were simply two people who had found in each other everything they'd been searching for. "Happy birthday, my love," Charlotte whispered. "Happy life, my love," Ben replied. And as the Montana night settled around them, soft and warm and full of promise, Mr. and Mrs. Benjamin Cross looked forward to all the tomorrows stretching ahead of them, secure in the knowledge that whatever the future held, they would face it hand in hand, heart to heart, building their dreams one day at a time. And so, in the vast wilderness of Montana territory, a love story that began with rejection bloomed into something beautiful and lasting. Charlotte Wilson, the mail-order bride deemed too small for frontier life, became Charlotte Cross, the cherished wife of one of the territory's most respected men. And Benjamin Cross, the gentle giant who had lived so long alone, found in Charlotte not just a partner, but his perfect match. Their story reminds us that sometimes our greatest disappointments lead to our greatest blessings. Sometimes the person who rejects us is simply clearing the path for the person who will cherish us. And sometimes the love we thought we'd never find is waiting just around the corner, in the form of someone brave enough to see our worth when others cannot. What started as a business arrangement between strangers became a partnership built on mutual respect, shared dreams, and a love that grew stronger with each passing day. Ben built Charlotte a house with his bare hands, but she built him a home with her heart. Their cabin in the woods became a sanctuary, their land became a legacy, and their marriage became proof that the biggest love often comes in the most unexpected packages. What do you think about Charlotte and Ben's story? Have you ever experienced a moment when what seemed like the worst thing turned out to be the best thing? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. We love hearing from our Wild West Stories family around the world. If this story touched your heart, make sure you hit that like button and subscribe for more incredible tales of love, loss, and second chances on the American frontier. Ring that notification bell so you never miss a story that might just change how you see your own journey. Until next time, remember that sometimes the most beautiful chapters of our lives begin with the words, "and then everything changed." Keep your hearts open to unexpected blessings, and we'll see you in the next Wild West story. This is Wild West Stories, where every tale reminds us that love, hope, and second chances can bloom even in the harshest of frontiers. Thank you for watching, and may your own story be filled with all the love and adventure you deserve.